Everyone's favourite politician is back in the headlines now, Simon. This is from Wednesday's Times, a call for a new radical centrism in politics.
This is Tony Blair. Tony Blair says Britain lacks any plan and needs a radical centre. I think it's quite interesting, this idea. I mean, there's so much, you know, to criticise Tony Blair. You can do all sorts of things. He's got this peculiar effect on the British people. But I do find that when he speaks, I find myself compelled to think about things, and that he has a way of making points which I find provocative and useful. Yeah. And so one question is, what does the radical centre mean? And I mean, I'm certainly upset now because I don't feel like I fit into the left and the right. It feels to me, I don't understand why the left always thinks it's right and the right never thinks it's wrong. You know? I feel like I want ideas from here and ideas from there, and I don't want necessarily an ideological position. And I think the radical centre, to me, means this idea that what you do is you take ideas and you start to combine them. And his particular thing, and I mean, I've heard him say this again and again and again in various lectures, it's about the impact of technology, how we really understand the kind of revolution we're going through at the moment, how we really understand the infrastructure and the way in which the underpinning things in society are changing, and how we actually get to grips with that with a plan, not kind of, you know, party political sort of manifestos, but a genuine plan which takes ideas from wherever. And I always find that interesting and thought-provoking, so I like it.
Well, I'll take a different view. I mean, the idea of a radical centre immediately sounds like an oxymoron, but this is actually based on the Rest is Politics podcast, which I forced myself to listen to in the car with Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell. I got through about half of it, and it was quite interesting. The most interesting thing Blair said was he talked about the centre ground problem. He talked about the post-ideological, practically based, clear values and applying them to the modern world. Now, to me, post-ideological, when people like Blair say it, tends to mean we're tearing through society with a load of left-wing ideas and we don't even care if you like them or we don't even notice. It's not actually post-ideological, because I believe Blair is much more radical and not as centrist as we believe on social and cultural issues. Broadly, I'd say, I think a lot of people would say, Thatcher forced Labour to be more free market and modernise on the economy. But what people don't say as much, which Peter Hitchens has covered really well, is that Blair and New Labour then forced the Tories to go much further left on social, moral, cultural issues. Yep. So now what you have is your average metropolitan liberal elite person, and I meet them all the time because I live in North London, and they tend to have fairly sound views on the economy and then radically left views on things like Black Lives Matter or Antifa, these, you know, supporting...
Yeah, but, come on, you can't accuse Blair of going down that route, because he has explicitly said that is a diversion. He's explicitly said that actually Labour needs to sort out what it means by a woman. He's explicitly said that actually getting captured by notions of Black Lives Matter and the campaigning element of that, not fighting racism or trying to end racism, but the campaign, he's explicitly rejected that. He has,
Simon, but I think Nick, if I might paraphrase or at least say what I think what you saw with David Cameron, for instance, and he had, remember, like a full term and then, and lost Brexit and resigned, was essentially a continuation of New Labour. The Tories essentially governed as New Labour.
Oh, yeah, but I take that.
He moved that dialogue to that extent.
Yeah, but Can I reply to your earlier point?
Yeah.
Because it's not that Blair explicitly comes out and says, I love BLM. It's that, and it would take a whole book to say why, but in that time period, we shifted on things like divorce laws. We shifted on things like marriage. We shifted on perception of Christianity as somehow a bad, dirty thing. And that seems to have happened during the Blair period and then in the Cameron period and so on.
It doesn't feel radical now, but if you looked at it to where we were 30 years ago...
Yeah, but if you... Yeah, OK, right. But the other things it shifted on was... I mean, we did shift our attitude towards marriage in the sense we started to make marriage same-sex as well as opposite sex. Yeah. We also did civil partnerships for people who weren't gay and so on and so on. I mean, those relationships have changed, and they've changed in order to respond to the change in demographics. I don't think you can accuse... You can accuse elements of the left and certainly elements of the Labour Party and that sort of Corbynista rump of absolutely pursuing a mad notion of identity politics with which I will not have. But on the other hand, I don't think you can accuse this idea of the radical centre of that, because the whole point about the radical centre is he explicitly talks about both parties have been through the problem of fringe politics, and he's trying to forward something.
He does, but I would even question that, because is Brexit really a fringe thing when 52% voted for it? But
he's not saying that.
He is. He does. He says in the podcast that Brexit was... But he says now...
He says, while not changing the Brexit decision, we need to fix the consequences of the way in which it was delivered.
Yes, but here he says the main parties have been through the problem of fringe politics becoming mainstream. And if you listen to the podcast, he means Brexit on the right and he means Corbyn on the left. But Brexit's not necessarily on the right and it's not fringe. But he now admits that they're not fringe anymore, these views. Yeah. But the point is, Now, the claim is, Simon, that while you're correct about Corbyn, but that Blair's lot were actually secretly, sort of in stealth, more left than you think. Blair admitted he used to be a Trotskyite. Many of the figures around Blair actually much more left than he. That's the claim.
But Blair used to say about the trade unions, he said, you think that I'm just doing this to make myself look electable. He said, don't be stupid about that. It's worse than that. I believe it. He was really clear about, for instance, trade union reform. Now, not all of that's great, but, I mean, as you see trade union numbers dip, you want actually more penetration of trade unions into private sector so that actually people's wages rise and there's more productivity, because actually that's what trade unions do.
Well, I think Simon's going to
move on, so I'm
going to concede that I've won.